Hello, in this tutorial we're going to briefly talk about building advanced variables and adding them to a statistical model. In the previous tutorials, we simply talked about building a model and adding variables to it. However, sometimes users want to add richer, more productive variables in order to increase the accuracy of a model. To do so, you go to when building a model, you select the Build Advanced tab. From there, you can select variables just as you would if you were selecting a basic variable. However, you can also add, subtract, multiply, or divide variables in order to create ratios, difference scores, or interactions. If you want to learn more about exactly what an interaction is or a difference variable, we do have an article written in our article section that talks about the different types of variables and why they're important to statistical modeling. However, for now we're going to simply create a variable that's a difference variable that is trying to look at if a player's daily fantasy points have changed over time. So we basically think that if a player used to score a lot of daily fantasy points and now they score fewer, that the difference between that, let's say they score 5 fewer on average per game, that difference is indicative of how many points they're going to score tonight. So we're going to select the variable DraftKings Fantasy Points over their past 10 games. Then we're going to select the same variable over their past 5 games. And we're going to subtract the first from the second. So we're looking at changes over time for a given variable. And we will add that to our model. Now, let's create another variable, which is we want to look at the ratio of points to turnovers, or let's say even assists to turnovers that a player gets. For that, we're going to select the variable assists, and we're going to divide assists for a player's last 10 games, and we're going to divide that by their turnovers for their past 10 games. And we're going to add that to our model. So now we've created two advanced variables, which has to do with subtracting or dividing one variable from another. Finally, we're going to add what is called an interaction. An interaction, while we go into it in more detail in our articles, describes that a variable might affect certain players or certain other players more than others. For example, a player who gets a lot of assists is going to be more affected by a team that allows few assists than a player who already doesn't get assists. Does that make sense? If a team shuts down assists for another team, a player who gets a lot of assists will be more affected than the center who gets no assists. So we're going to create that interaction. Interactions are created by multiplying two variables together. So we're going to multiply assists for all the players' last 10 games times, we're going to go to opponents allowed variables, and we're going to go to assists, the opposing team's assists allowed. So this is essentially saying our point guard on average gets 10 assists, has averaged 10 assists over the last 10 games. But their opponent has only allowed 12 assists for the entire team. So they're very good at stopping assists. And we're saying that that will affect players who get lots of assists more than players who get few assists. We go into this in more detail in the articles, as I've already said, but that is an example of how we'd create 3 types of advanced variables. If you'd like to know more, read the articles or experiment with them on your own. Once again, thank you for your time.